Writers, readers, drinkers, lend me your ears and your livers. Welcome to Writers Drinking Whiskey Open Bar, the show where we battle the nightmare of plot holes and the unholy abominations of contrivances, one boozy author panel and perhaps a round of silver bullets at a time. I'm your host, William R. Hensey, and I am really delighted and honored to have a fabulous panel of author hearers, one of which I know is very warm. So let's get to introducing everyone. And so, as is my wont, I like to have a little fun with these. So, if you wouldn't mind, kind of let the audience know your name, what you're drinking, if you're drinking anything with us today, and what is the scariest book, the scariest movie, and the scariest question you've ever been asked. So let's start with Dana Ridenour, and I do have my monikers for everyone here. So, and Dana is the undercover author herself. Boop, peekaboo is out. Dana, what's the scariest movie, book, and question you've ever been asked?
Oh, probably scariest book would be Red Dragon because it was so realistic. Scariest movie would either be The Exorcist or Silence of the Lambs. Between those two, probably The Exorcist because I saw it when I was much younger. I think I
Uh-huh.
slept on my parents' floor after that one. It scared the daylights out of me.
I believe it. It still scares the daylights out of me.
Scariest questions usually anytime somebody goes into that political realm because I am backstroking to get out of that situation. I do not like to talk politics at book events. So yeah, so scariest questions always have to do with politics. And then because
Uh-huh.
I'll eventually I'll open my mouth to the point where I'll alienate half the audience.
I know there's really no way to get around it where you could say like
Yeah.
I like clean air and someone will just disagree with you
Somebody's gonna
because there
fight
has
you over it.
yeah, there's a clean air and a non-clean air faction or whatever it happens to be. So of course.
Exactly.
Awesome, thank you for that. And then now let's go to Dario Cherriello, the editor who will drive all the comma splices and sobriety from your writing process. Dario, scariest movie, book, in question.
Scariest book has to be The People of the Abyss by Jack London, which is not fiction, and that's why it's scary. He went undercover in Victorian London, in the slums of Victorian London, and reported on it. And of course, he tends to melodrama as a writer, but knowing that what he was reporting on is real I found it more terrifying than probably any fiction I've read.
Sure.
Um, yeah, that was fabulous. Movies, I avoid jump scare movies and real shock horror and things like Jaws because I would never go back into the water if I saw Jaws. Um,
Not
Probably the
even the lakes
scary.
in Michigan. You just be like, no, no more, no
No,
more
no
water
more
at all.
lakes. No
Yeah.
water.
Hmm.
Scariest movie probably was, I think it might have been the original Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde when I was a young kid. The transformation terrified me.
Sure.
And scariest questions, anything to do with sports and a lot of things to do with pop culture. Just don't even look at me.
But I was a sportsman today. I have my Steeler jersey
Sure.
on to go, and it actually makes sense because as we record NFL, season starts here tomorrow. I think is the first game. So, but it's also was just the only costume I had semi available. Um, awesome. Thanks for that, Dario. And let's move on to Jessica L. Sparrow, and the author that even the Raven himself quotes.
So normally people would think that I would say the scariest book would be anything by Edgar Allan Poe. Scary, but not scariest for me. Um, I would also have to hearken to a short story, The Yellow Wallpaper. Every time I've read it, I always get a different feel from it, and it's still very creepy to me. Like it still just sits there in my bones.
Uh-huh.
Um, Scariest movie? God, it's such a hard question. There's so many great horror movies out there with like different themes and genres, but I find myself constantly pushing for people to watch The Ritual. I
Okay.
absolutely love it. It's a modern folk horror. I'm usually more about like supernatural, but also like psychological supernatural, and it's just chef's kiss. And the scariest question would have to be, what is your book about?
All right,
Like
very
deer in
good.
headlights.
Uh-huh.
I know what it's about, but for me to explain it to you, it's just like, how much time do we have?
Sure. It's like the dreaded elevator pitch, right? Like you have the elevator, you get 15 seconds, and it's just like, I
Yeah,
don't want to write books that sum up in 15 seconds. This is so hard.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, very good. Awesome. Thanks for that. So, Gaby, let's go to you. Scariest book, movie in question.
Okay, so before I knew I was never going to watch horror movies again, I was a kid and I remember Friday the 13th and I hated it. I was just like, oh my God, how am I supposed to hang out with my friends? Like, this is just so
Hmm.
uncool. And so to this day, I kind of remember it.
Sure. And
Book?
Jason also is afraid of water, like Dario would be if he watched Jaws. So, you know.
Interesting parallels. I didn't think about that. I've blocked out a good amount. And then I think for a book, has anyone ever heard of Camp of the Saints?
Mm-mm.
No, I
It's
don't think
this
so.
like it's a book that was to kind of galvanize the white power people, I think,
Mhm.
and get them to be more suspicious of foreigners and more suspicious of immigrants. And somebody misguidedly recommended it to me. And I was like,
Oh,
this thing is the worst I've ever read. And I put
Uh-huh.
it down and I never picked it up.
All
Uh,
right.
so, yeah, do not recommend. And the
Mm-hmm.
question, I think right now, as someone who's called herself a writer for most of my life, I think the scary question now is, what are you working on? Because I'm not working on anything. I'm doing a lot of little films on my YouTube at protests. Like that's my new hobby. Instead
Mm-hmm.
of going to Saturday morning critiques, I go to Saturday morning rallies and I talk to people and I take pictures of their signs and compliment their creativity. And then I come home and make a video and I post it every few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a scary time.
Mhm. It
All
And
is.
right.
truth is weirder than fiction right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have a very brief aside. I have actually my wife and I just talked about that because I'm reading a book called Fourth Wall Phantoms. The guy that was on the show this week, that just aired as we record this so it's early September, wrote a book called Fourth Wall Phantoms. So he's a actually like a world-class tuba player, but he is also a paranormal researcher and a fiction author.
Mhm.
Um, and we were talking about it, and I was talking to my wife, just because she always listens to the show now. She used to never did until recently because she was like, I thought I was going to hate it, and then she listened, and she's like, oh, I actually do like listening to the show. Otherwise, hates listening to me. It's just that I managed not to
Oh.
talk enough to ruin it for her. But I was like, fiction has to be plausible for the world in which it's created. And if it feels contrived or something, people turn off. Reality just is what happens, right? So it could be like, oh, the character, conveniently gets hit by a car. The villain gets hit by a car, and you could read that in a book and be like, oh, that seems so silly and like lame, and they just threw that in there. In real life, that could happen. Like if Hitler was walking across the street, get hit by a car, that would just be history. It would just be Hitler got hit by a car. You know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah.
yeah, I think fact is always it has the ability to always be a little weirder than fiction because it's just what happens, and you can't actually debate it from there. Awesome. My diatribe completely aside now. Let's go to Jim Carney. And Jim, what did I have? Oh, a man who never suffers the vice of fools. Jim, what is the scariest book, question, and movie?
Well, I think in terms of books, one I just recently read called Jesus Wept, and it's a study of the last seven popes.
Oh,
It's
well.
pretty scary.
Uh-huh. Sure. Does that have anything to do? I recently heard the term the Pope prophecy or something. Is it anything to do with that? There was like some
No,
prophecy that there's going to hit a certain number of popes or something or other.
well, it's more dealing with their personalities and the way that they
Okay.
approached the papacy, and certainly the way they dealt with the pedophilia business.
Sure. Uh-huh.
So it was a tough read,
Right.
to
Sure.
be
I
very
believe it.
honest.
Mm-hmm.
As far as movies, well, I haven't been really scared by a movie in quite some time, but I'd have to go with Silence of the Lambs and probably Psycho.
Oh,
Oh,
sure.
Psycho.
Going back a couple of years,
Woo!
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. My favorite thing at Universal, they still do it if you do the tram tour. They still have the Bates Motel there. And
Do they?
Norman Bates will come out and then it depends on the weather, whether he chases you. I've kind of come to learn now because we have season passes because it's a half hour or so from me. But then he'll still chase you sometimes with a knife, unless like it's like, hailing or it's too hot or whatever.
Yeah.
Then he just hangs out and they talk to him and he looks scary and pulls up the knife. But
Yeah,
yeah,
but
that's a scary one.
you wouldn't even hurt a fly.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Very good. So, what was the scariest question you've ever been asked?
Ah, yes. That's a good one. I don't know.
Very good. That means you're a man that's comfortable with the truth because it's like, just ask me anything. I'll just take
I
it.
suppose.
Very
I
good.
can't
I think
think of
the
any.
scary.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think the scariest question I've ever been asked is actually my wife, the lovely Claire, proposed to me. And I didn't realize it at the time because I kept joking that I was going to propose to her, and she really liked buffalo wings and hot dogs and kind of pub food at the time. And I kept joking I was going to incorporate that into how I proposed to her. And so she decided to beat me to it. And we had a friend that used to make us salsa all the time. So Priya would make us this like big thing of salsa. And so we went up the coast and we're eating salsa on the last day there. And there's a ring in the salsa and I'm just eating around it. And Claire's looking at me like really expectantly, right? I'm just like, what's going on? And she's like, don't you see the ring there? I'm like, yeah, Priya must have lost her ring. I'll just give it back to her because it's not like someone I don't know. It's like I know she handmade this. She must have forgot. Here's a ring. I'm gonna eat this delicious salsa. And she's like, so what's your answer? And then because I'm always thinking like, what's the right answer supposed to be? I was like, oh no, is this like, am I caught? Like what just happened? And then of course I finally realized what I was being asked. I'm like, okay, yes, of course.
Oh
But I
my
think that's the
God.
scariest one for me.
I never proposed either. We were
You know?
talking one night, and she said, "Well, when we get married," that was that.
There you go. There you go. It works out. So awesome. So I would look. So today our author theme is going to be fear, kind of writing fear in all its forms, not just kind of like the horror sense, but you can have fear in every story. Fear of different types. So, but before we got there, one of my favorite questions to ask, and I don't know. So Dana, Dario. We're pretty early on. I know I asked Jim and Jessica, and I think I'm not positive if I asked you one way or the other, Gaby, but my favorite question to ask people is, have you ever witnessed anything inexplicable? Like something you couldn't explain, that could be in any way you want to take that. As flies continue to circle me because the Italian side of me gets very hand gesticulating, but yeah, so I wanted to start there, just maybe kind of just go through, and anyone that wants to start can jump in. If not, I just go by how everyone's lined up on my screen. Otherwise, that's the secret to my order and picking people. But does anyone want to jump in? If not, Dario, you're unfortunately the one that's immediately right to me, and I would be starting with you.
I thought about this, and in terms of fear and Halloween related, not inexplicable at that level, but at the level of coincidence that goes beyond anything believable, and moments of clairvoyance, especially in dreams, foreknowledge. That kind of thing has happened to me a lot. Occasionally what may appear like telepathy. So some paranormal phenomena, but always in the kind of psychic realm rather than the kind of inexplicable, I don't know, ghost or UFO or external event. So more
Hmm.
internal, I think.
Sure. Is there one you care to share? Is there like a moment in particular?
The number of times I've dreamed something very unlikely and that's actualized within the next 24 hours is like probably, more than I can count on both hands, probably.
Hmm.
Particular events, not
But never
immediately.
lottery numbers, huh?
Maybe later. I'll have to think about that one a
Well,
bit.
we had one of those, when you think of someone and then they call you kind of moments.
Oh,
Me and
yeah.
you just, a couple of weeks ago where I was literally, I was actually texting you, but because you're, East Coast and I'm West Coast, I was like, it's kind of late for him. I'm gonna schedule it to send in the morning. Because I wanted to check in on you, and then, but I didn't want to wake you, right? So I'm like, okay, just texting, and then as I get done, putting the text and putting the schedule send or whatever, you literally had texted me during that time. You went, hey, Bill, I was just thinking of you, da da da. And it was just like one of those. I know that like, you could just always say it's circumstance, but sometimes it's just weird. You're just like,
Well,
it's.
it's interesting. It is weird. I mean, given any infinite series of events, stuff is going to happen, even
Mm-hmm.
against incredible odds. You can roll a dice and get 20 and get 20 times in a row. But on the sort of telepathy synchronicity level, um, not only does it happen to me all the time, but with synchronicity and coincidence, especially, the more you observe it, the more it happens, I find. I don't think it's simply that, you're dialing into a pattern recognition thing. I think it's actual. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, I've no
Sure.
doubt at all. And I tend a little to the skeptical side on phenomena, but I think that really the reality we perceive with our senses and rather, three-dimensional limited minds is a very narrow slice of what's out there and what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Sure. Absolutely. Awesome. Thanks for that. So, Dana, you want to take us from there?
Well, I was really disappointed when I found out the X-Files didn't really exist. I thought when I joined the FBI, I was going to be working for the X-Files. So
Uh-huh. I was hoping I was interviewing you. I was like, I wonder if she was in the X-Files secretly. Maybe she'll tell me about it.
there we go. There we go. The one thing I can think of when I was in high school, we had a séance, and we had it in my basement and everything. A group of girls and all that. And
Though a proper place to do it, right? It has
yes,
to be
of
a
course, of
basement.
course. But then somebody contacted and he said he was my grandfather. Of course, I knew my grandfather. He lived right next door and I was very close to him. So I didn't think this person was my grandfather. And he kept saying, like, sugar plum, sugar plum, sugar plum. And so and we got scared and all ran upstairs. And so we told my mom, and my mom went completely white. And I said, "Well, what?" I said, "Who was it? What was that all about?" And she said, "Your great grandfather, he called you Sugar Plum, but he died when I was two, so I never knew him. So I was two
Uh-huh.
years old." She said he was crazy about you, and he called you Sugar Plum, and that was the
Uh,
only person that's ever called me Sugar Plum. So that was kind of a freaky. I didn't want to go in the basement for like a month after that. I was so freaked out.
right, right. I
And
believe
it
it.
was just a weird thing. And, completely, there was no explanation. I had never met him to me. I mean, he died when I was two, so I
Sure.
didn't know him.
Right, right. Yeah.
Never had heard anybody ever call me Sugar Plum.
Sure, that's not like sweetheart, right? Like
No,
it's like I call
Mhm.
my wife half the time sweetheart. I call my daughters when they call sweet. Like that's just a term of affection you kind of throw out.
right.
The sugar plum is doesn't strike me as the random kind of thing you just call everyone,
No, it's never ever heard of it before. So that was kind
Uh-huh.
of a weird thing to happen. I was still a
Yeah.
little freaked out.
Well, at
Yeah, I
least he
mean, too
didn't
bad.
say his name was Captain Howdy.
What's that?
I said at least it didn't say his name was Captain Howdy. I
Oh,
took a reference.
yeah.
Definitely get rid of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure. My wife always gets annoyed with me because I like to go. Like the Queen Mary is about everything's a half hour to 3 hours from us where we are in LA, except for like the west of LA. Then everything is an hour to like 18 hours away from us. But I always say like she's like, oh, why do you want to go do these ghost things? Why do you want to go to the Queen Mary, all these places that you think are haunted? I'm like, I think the ghost will think I'm charming. Like I'm not afraid. Like they'll see me and they're like, I really like this guy, you know? And she's like, but in real life, like people when they're alive don't say that. Why do you think like I'm like, yeah, when they pass over, that's when they'll realize my charm, at that point. So awesome. So let's move over to Jessica.
Oh my God, I got stories for days. I mean, growing up in my culture, I'm Puerto Rican, and just in my family in general, we have a lot of spiritualists, spirituals, or brujeros or santeros and stuff. So I've heard of a lot of things. I grew up around a lot of things, but as far as a personal experience, I mean, just like when Dario was talking about dreams, seeing things in dreams, knowing something's going to happen, having like this like gut instinct about something in particular, about some people or an event. Still nothing about lotto numbers, so don't ask.
Right.
Hasn't happened
That's the
yet.
one that never happens. It's the weirdest thing.
No, no, it's never that. It's something where I'm just like, can it just be something that like actually could be helpful?
Yeah.
But personal experience would be still it boggles my mind to this day, but I would say a couple years back, I work at a college, and it's an extension center of another college, and I was like walking the halls, and I basically was like opening up some of the classrooms, and mind you, this is like in the winter by like 7 o'clock in the morning. It's still pretty dark. I'm turning on the lights and just going around minding my business, walking the halls, and I hear like a man whistling. And I was like, this is weird. I'm thinking, oh, maybe it's coming from the elevator, but no one else was in the building. It's not a humongous building. No one else can get in at a certain time. By like 7:30 is when all the doors actually open to the public. Only those with like access keys can get in before that time. And so I was talking about it to the building manager, and he told me that years and years ago, there was a building manager there who unfortunately uh, took his own life by jumping off the building itself. And that space and area where I was at, where I heard the whistling, is kind of near the spot where he fell. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I mean, it's not like my first time like hearing or dealing with that, but it's whenever you hear it and it has like an actual story to someone who had a tragic ending, it's always kind of like, very concerning. But yeah, a lot of weird stuff.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Awesome. Thank you for that. Gaby, you want to take us from there?
Sure. My story, aside from the dreams, I've had a lot of dreams communicating with people. Maybe it's a figment of my imagination, but it feels like I get to visit with people who have passed over. It's very comforting. I wake up feeling amazing. Um, I want to share happened in Sedona, Arizona. And I had just finished a contract where I was up at the crack of dawn, and I was living in LA. My sister and I decided we were going to do Thanksmas, and we were going to meet in Arizona. So she flew out from Florida. I flew in from California, and we drove up to Sedona together and had a big adventure. So the first day we were there, we were up so early because she was 3 hours behind normally, and I was used to getting up at 5. So we're like, why not? Let's just take a hike. Well, this was kind of before I knew about the paranormal stuff that went on up there. And so we're just walking up the main road. If you've ever been to Sedona, you probably know what I'm talking about. And and there's this monument called Bell Rock. It's just this rock. It's this mountainous thing that's shaped like a bell. And as we're walking towards it, I see this very bright light off to the right hand side. And I'm like, Marie, look at that big bright light. Is that the North Star? And I'm just waking up, it's 5 in the morning. And she's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, that one right there. And she's like, I don't see it. And finally I look over at her and I'm like pointing. And the second I took my eye off of it, it disappeared. And so then we met some lady later that day, and she's like, oh, sounds like you saw an Earth ship. And I was like,
An
so
Earth ship.
excited.
Okay. Uh-huh.
It just looked like a really abnormally large star or maybe an orb. I don't
Call
know.
you back.
But it
Okay.
disappeared into either the Bell Rock or it jetted off into nothing. I have no idea.
Did she explain what's an Earth ship? Like, is that like just another term for UFO? Is that just like that doesn't sound, you know what I mean?
That's what she said. So I'm guessing
okay.
it's like a ship that flies in around Earth.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, very good. Well, you got to see one. Awesome. Thanks for that. And then Jim, you want to take us from there?
Oh, you and I may have talked about this before, but I live in Milwaukee, as I said, but I grew up in northern Minnesota in an area called the Mesabi Iron Range, and the biggest town on the Iron Range is Hibbing. And my grandparents lived in Hibbing. So on Christmas of '66, we had a baby, a relatively new baby, and we had spent Christmas Eve with my wife's parents in Minneapolis and drove up to Hibbing on Christmas Day for the Carney family festivities. And my aunt met me at the door and told me that my grandfather had died. Here's a man, very profane individual. He and I spent a lot of time together. He went to midnight mass in communion, was on his knees saying his prayers. Christmas morning, had a stroke, and that was that. So he had done, as far as he was concerned, everything right, which was kind of his way. But anyway, the next day was family day at the mortuary. So we all went over, and the Hibbing mortuary had 3 rooms, one on each side, one up the middle. And he was in the one on the left. And I could tell nobody wanted to go in. So I did. And I knelt down on the kneeler there next to the coffin and started saying a prayer. And I heard this big sigh. And I turned around to see who had come in behind me, and there was nobody there. I looked at him, and he was dead. But I heard that sigh.
Right. Sure.
And I can only guess.
Right. Right. Sure. No, thank you for that. And, it is interesting that the like different phenomenon people like experience, right? Like with with ghosts or things like that. Like they've kind of changed over time. Like it used to be like the ghosts were very like physical. Like Victorian times, like you literally like the ghost you would not even know that they were a ghost, right? But certain things like sound and things that, or even like smell, right? Like lots of people would be like, oh, I had this smell that came through. There's actually like a true crime case. I can't remember exactly which one, but there was it was basically someone that had lost a family member that was going out for revenge. And then literally as they were like getting ready to like pull the trigger, they had the smell that reminded them of the person they lost. And then that told them not to do it, and they didn't do it. And the person ended up being caught and prosecuted and part of whatever true crime thing I was seeing. But isn't it interesting those other senses, right? Like I feel like sight is so easy to deceive us, right? But sound, all those things, you're like, oh, what was that? Like why? How? It's not like there would be some sigh if you're the only one in there, right? Like it only would be you sighing, in theory. You know, but,
Hmm.
Yeah.
yeah,
I
but
did think of one I can relate actually. Now that I
yeah.
think about it, I've got a few, but one that's mystified me my whole life is I was about maybe 30, and I was working in a small business. We imported Italian furniture and lighting in London, and I worked in the business for 3 years, 4 years, and I sort of ran the warehouse and things. We had a delivery driver, Josh, who was actually a friend of mine who had managed to get employed, and I was sitting. We had offices around the edge of a large showroom, and I was sitting talking to our secretary in my office, and my friend Josh, who did the deliveries, had gone off on a run, and he was going to be out all day doing deliveries. So I'm talking to our secretary, and I just looked through the door of my office into the showroom, and I saw Josh just walk across the showroom, solid as day. It's morning. I haven't had anything to drink, no drugs. I'm in my right mind. Um,
Yeah.
and watched him for maybe 4 or 5 seconds through the doorway, and he's just looking around and looking for something. And a minute later, I say to Diane, the secretary, "Oh, Josh just got back." And she said, "He can't be. He was going out all day unless he's broken down." And so I went out to look for him. He's not around anywhere. He's not in the building. We didn't have cell
Mm.
phones then. And he showed up several hours later. And I told him about it, and he was really freaked out. I have never had another hallucination in my life, if that's what it was. He was as solid as someone, he was 15 feet away, 20 feet away, and solid for several seconds.
Right.
Bizarre.
Right. Sure. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's funny. I was riding my bike, I don't know, a couple months back now, but I was riding up, and what I tend to do when I ride my bike is since we're on the foothills, anyone that's watching, there's the Rose Parade, you know, Rose Bowl. When they show Pasadena, they show the mountains behind them. That's the San Gabriel Mountains, and I'm about due east of Pasadena, maybe 10, 15 miles east along those San Gabriel Mountains. So to get a workout, I like the hills, and we have lots of this residential hills that get very steep, you know. So I don't. I sometimes I get out on the trail. When I was younger, I used to do it all the time. As I've gotten older, I just kind of like go through the neighborhoods, do all the really steep hills, and get a workout. And I was coming back. I didn't go very far. I didn't even do that. Like I have a little standard one I do, which is about what is it, 16 kilometers or so. Um, and I was coming back, and I looked across the street. Had to stop at a light. I looked across the street, and there was a black guy coming, like a big, like, he was um, it looked like, what it reminded me of, because I had played high school football. He actually kind of looked like some of the guys I'd played with. He had like the shirts we would wear before we would put the pads and stuff on, And I forget, I think I thought he had looked like my buddy Jeremy, just like slightly, but he was kind of far, but I just looked. And so I was like, oh, that's funny. It kind of looks like Jeremy. Like I knew it wasn't, I've moved away. I'm like, I'm sure it's not. And so the light turns, and I start riding my bike, and I kind of look away, whatever. I didn't think much of it. It wasn't that big a deal. And as I get closer, I always kind of like say hi to people, because I'm a companionable sort, right? I always say like hi and things to people as I see them, or smile at them, or nod. I look over, and it's this Asian guy, and like I literally kind of did a double take, because I'm like, wait, and it's the same shirt, same everything, but now it's clearly like an Asian guy, and he has this weird smile on his face, like he's getting away with something. And I just like
Whoa.
looked, and I'm like, that's so weird. I'm like, I just rode, and he looked at me the whole time. And I looked at him, and I'm sure he nodded, because even if it was like, a doppelganger, I'll nod at them, because I'm polite, I'm a West Virginia kid. I try to mind my manners. And I rode by, and I'm like, I swear to God, that was a black guy, like a minute ago. Like that, like look, it had reminded me of Jeremy. Like this makes no sense. And I turned around and kind of looked, and I could kind of tell from there because now I'm far enough away that, um, and he's also facing away and everything else. I just couldn't tell from there. And like, should I turn back around? And I'm like, yeah, whatever. I'm just gonna go because whatever it is, like if it's nothing, then I don't want to turn around because I'm tired and want to get home. If it is something, maybe I shouldn't turn around because I don't know. I had
Yeah.
told my wife and my brother-in-law we ended up going out to the store after I got back and showered up and stuff. And when not watching, my wife and my brother or brother-in-law are Asian. So I telling them and they're like, you sure you like your blood sugar didn't drop? And I'm like, I don't know, maybe my blood sugar dropped. I don't know. But we're going to the store now. I feel fine. I'm not seeing people that are changing colors and looks, completely. But yeah, it's interesting though. I don't know what to think of it exactly, but it's strange how like sometimes you see something and you're like, that was clear as day. It could be a
Mhm.
hallucination, but maybe my blood sugar's dropped. But why just that one moment? Why just this one random person that was
And
walking by?
that's kind of the interesting thing is the banality of some of it, the mundane
Hmm.
aspect of it. It's just, but there's no denying it when something like that happens to you. You know it's real. I find the whole
Hmm.
doppelganger idea interesting.
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
Oh,
I've more than once had people come up to me and swear I was, playing darts with them in a pub the night before or something like that. More
Really?
than
you guys should watch Lake Mungo. It's done in a documentary style, but it kind of touches on that. It's a pretty good creepy movie.
Uh-huh.
But
what's it
yeah,
called?
it
I'm
might have been
sorry.
Lake Mungo, Mungo. It's really good. Might have been a skinwalker, not a doppelganger though.
Right? Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
What's it
Well,
on?
and
It's probably on some of the streaming services. I think it might be on Prime. I'm
Right.
not 100% sure. But oh, it's good. See, again, like you asked me about horror movies. I'm just like, I can't pick one.
right, for sure, for sure. Well, it's funny because then it was like back in the day, like fairies, right? Where before we've kind of Disneyfied them, in modern times, like they could change forms and things, and there's an old tradition of that. So, but very cool. But thanks for that, Dario. So before I get us too sidetracked, I do want to get to some of the writing talk for any of the writing friends that want to join us here. So, question for the panel today is writing fear. And I do like, I know it's Halloween themed, so I don't mean fear though only in the sense of scary, right? Like you can have a fear of the unknown, you have fear of failure, right? There's all kinds of different fears. How do you go about, writing that? So, and I thought maybe for discussion purposes, maybe we start with writing fears and the characters' fear, right? And I want to transition eventually to how we get the reader to feel that fear. But maybe we kind of start with the characters in the story themselves. When you want to go and whatever the genre is, so feel free jump in however you want. It can be horror, it can be thrillers, it can be whatever, right? It can be any genre, but how do you go about describing a character in fear generally? So, and anyone that wants to jump in and have at it.
Well,
Um,
I'll jump in.
oh,
Oh, go ahead.
um, so I I usually write in first person when it comes to my characters. And when expressing their fear, I always go for the physical embodiment or what like the body chemistry can do because I know what a panic attack feels like. And I use that for some characters, not like all of them need to have it. Like everybody has like a different part to that, but in particular to one of my main characters in the debut novel, she is being haunted by something. And so it slowly creeps up on her even before she sees it. Like she could just feel that within her. And the way that I express that is just the air kind of being pulled away from from her, as if like it just became very stifling in the room itself. Um, Almost like a energy charge on her arms rather than like, her the back of her hair or neck hairs or whatever stood up. But it's just more that like there is this sense of something lurking and you're yet to see it, but you can just feel it almost as if it's an embodiment of you as well. So I usually try to go in that aspect of it. Yeah, I tend to use my personal panic attacks as like the symptoms of to
Sure.
like show like this is what it feels like. Your heart's racing and you're ready to take off, but you're either frozen or you're taking off and nothing's happened yet. You haven't seen anything yet. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. Dana, I know you were trying to chime in. You want to take us from there?
Yeah, I don't write horror, obviously, but I do write my fear is more psychological, I would say. One of the scariest scenes I think I ever wrote was in my second book, where my main character was held captive in a cabin, and she'd been beaten up, and then it was like an attempted sexual assault as she was getting away. And when I wrote that chapter, I mean, I was sweating, my heart was racing. I was a mess. I got finished. I had to leave. I had to go for a walk. I had to get out of there. I had to try to get my back to normal. But I
Sure.
think with me, I draw on unfortunately in the job that I was in, I did have situations where I was pretty much scared shitless a couple of times.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so, somebody points a gun at you, that's gonna bring up some emotions. And
Yeah.
I've had situations where I've been in tussles and fights and trying to get somebody under control. And so I draw from what I've experienced as an agent, and that's how I write, especially the character of Lexi. I put myself in her place, and I mean, I kind of feel it as I'm writing it, which might not be the healthiest thing to do because, man, you need a stiff drink after that chapter. But
Sure.
that's how I approached writing the psychological stuff from my point of view right now. But because I don't write horror and stuff, but try
Right.
to deal, I guess, with realism. Yeah, what
Yeah.
make it as realistic as possible. Because sometimes I
Sure.
think the more real something is, the scarier it is.
Mhm.
Right. Right. Absolutely. So uh, someone feel free to jump in here, but I think that's a really, as the fly goes around my head, it's not just the Italian side of me coming out right now. But I think that's actually a really interesting where place to kind of take this next is as a writer, how do you go about doing it, right? Because there's like, as actors, right, you get that there's method actors and they're the ones that try to like feel everything, right? It comes from a place for them and they do it. And there's other schools of acting where it's like, no, you don't try to access your own fear. You do it more clinically or whatever, right? There's different schools of it. How does everyone, and feel free to skip this question and go back to the original one, but how does everyone on the panel kind of do it? Because I do it a lot like you do, Dana. Like I tend to like feel what's happening. I don't try to make it a personal place necessarily, but I try to I try to be the actor because, I still think of myself as an actor. I'm a thespian, even though I don't do it anymore. And I try to feel what's happening to that character at the time. But there is some like harm to that. There's some danger psychologically to you, to do it. You need to come back and be with your family, go do a job, whatever, it might be, right? Walk the dogs. But um, I don't know that that's always the best way, but how does everyone on the panel handle that? Dario, go
So
ahead.
um, I've only written two novels, but in my first one, it's a caper thriller, and the protagonists are really good people who are terrified of going to jail and losing their freedom and getting locked away for 30 years.
Right.
Um, and my second novel was a ritual black magic thriller. It wasn't quite horror, but it was verging on it. So, at a technical level, I'd say, well, first of all, the reader has to care about the character. and I say this every time I'm on your show, Bill, I'm sorry, but that's the
It's okay.
biggest fault for most writers today. So once the reader's aligned with your character, the stakes have to be really clear. What's it going to cost the character if things go against them? And the stakes should escalate, of course. Now, this all sounds very technical and thought out, but I think if you've got, I'm a pantser, I'm not a plotter, as you know. I think if you've got a story where the characters are organically creating the plot as they go, that if your setup is strong enough, that's going to happen. So the reader is aligned with the character and cares. The character has a lot to lose, and pretty much most of the time, things are not going to be working in their favor. And third of all, then you go for really deep interiority. I think Jessica's right about the physiological aspects. You've got to paint in those physiological reactions. They have to be there, all the senses. And I think also, for me, a moving thing in all fiction is when the character, your protagonist perhaps, is really afraid, but they do it anyway because they have to do it, and that's courage. That's moving, and I think it sucks the reader in even more. Another good technique, I think, is the other viewpoint aspect where you have a character who really believes in your protagonist and what they're doing and fears for them.
Sure.
That's all I got.
Yeah. How do you, as when you were writing, so it was Black Easter was the kind of thriller, horror kind of thriller, and then Sutherland's Rules, the caper one you had mentioned. You as the writer, the flies are driving me crazy. You as the writer, how did you go about getting to the place? Was it just those technical aspects like you mentioned, or did you kind of find a personal place to kind of to direct, you know?
Well, I've never smuggled boatloads of drugs, and I've never 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 faced down the demons of outer hell.
Mhm.
So, but I've known fear.
At least not until the statute of limitations have run out and you can admit, to your
Do we
crimes
still have
willy-nilly.
such a thing? um, we've all known fear. So, if you're writing real characters, you can't help but align with them, I think. So at some level, I'm feeling I'm not going out of my way to be a method actor, but I'm taking down what my character says, and there's some alignment, and especially, if you're going for deep internal dialogue or interiority, you can't help but build it up. I don't know if I've answered your question there. In terms of which I think you and Dana mentioned, the blowback upon oneself of getting into those really scary places. If it ends well, and I like happy endings, then that's okay.
Uh-huh. Sure. Yeah,
Did
thank
I
you for that.
answer your
Anyway,
question?
yeah, yeah, no, I think that was fine. Yeah. I'm curious about there's the nuts and bolts of what we do as
Yeah.
writers, right? And you could go on YouTube, you can go anywhere, buy a book, like you'll find nuts and bolts, every which way you go. Um, I'm generally a little more interested in the personal, what it costs to be a writer, right? Like, so what are the things you're trying to do? Like, how are like, and maybe this is because I was in my formative years, or, I liked writing. I also liked acting. So I did more acting when I was younger than I did writing. Um, and in writing, it's not the difficult conversation. That is the conversation is,
Mhm.
how do you get yourself into the role? How do you find what's my motivation, right? So there's writing advice is every character should have motivation on every page, which is good advice. It almost feels like it came from the stage to me because every actor is going, "What's my motivation? You know, how do I get there?" So I'm always kind of interested in what writers do to get them to the place. And sometimes it's very technical, sometimes it's not. You know, I mean, I don't think there's a right answer. I just think it's interesting to kind of put them out there.
I, for me personally, I never start as technical. Like, I really would like to be that organized, but when it comes to writing a first draft, I'm not. It sort of plays almost like a movie in my head, and I have a tendency to sometimes act out certain things. For example, I thought I was home by myself. I had my AirPods in. I had music is always my go-to as well. I
Mm.
always have a
Yeah.
playlist for whatever it is I'm writing to get me into the mood. And I'm listening to something and I am acting something out. And I remember just like hissing really hard. And then I just feel something behind me and I turn around and my husband's like, babe, what the hell are you doing? And I was like, I'm
Sure.
just I'm trying to write. I'm getting into so I yeah, it's never I mean, of course, like you said, the nuts and bolts are there. Like if you read it enough, if you listen to another, enough authors and take in as much of the advice as you can, it's there in the back of your mind, but or my mind, personally speaking. And but my first draft is always usually very fluid. It's like watching a movie, and I feel like I'm just there taking down the notes of like what's happening, who's feeling what, and it just seems like to take over on itself. And it's like you said, sometimes the characters will keep moving the scenes going, going, going. Because there's sometimes where I just feel like I wouldn't say something like that. Like, why would I put that in there? And it's just like,
Sure.
but this character would. This character would say something like that. It's the editing process where I have to be technical, and that's where I suffer. I suffer so hard because there are times where I just don't want to cut certain things, or the sequence of certain scenes don't make any sense. And then also in the back of my brain, I'm thinking about, I know this entire story from beginning, middle, end. I know all the nuances, but there are certain details that need to be in there so that this reader or the audience can see what
Sure.
it is that I'm seeing. So
Yeah, awesome. So actually, so Jem, you said something earlier when we were talking dramatic monologue that the characters reveal more than they intend to, which I think is awesome, right? I mean, sometimes I think of there's writing advice and then there's next level writing advice. There's kind of like the like I always think like what you leave unsaid is a really powerful thing, and that's kind of ends up being a next level kind of writing thing. Does that play? So when we're talking, fear, just even just character motivation generally, how do you go about that when you're doing the dramatic monologue and you want to get across the thing that the character doesn't know, but they're revealing about themselves anyways?
That's a good question. I've been thinking about a story that I have had in mind for a long time and have yet to write, based on a trip into the Boundary Waters that four of my friends and I took between our junior and senior year in high school. And one night, this is going to be the central event. What's going to happen is this didn't happen, but what's going to happen is these guys really look forward to this trip, and in the end, they don't like each other anymore. So they
Okay.
kind of ruin everything for themselves. But the central event, it actually did happen. This one night we were camped on an island, and a big full moon, and down at the end of the lake, a wolf started to howl. So we started howling back. And all of a
Okay.
sudden there were 3 or 4 or 5 wolves howling at us, and they started moving around the lake in our direction.
Yeah.
And one of the guys, ironically, the biggest and toughest of us all of a sudden said, "Come on, guys, let's hit the sack." And I realized he was scared.
Uh-huh.
And I said to him, interestingly enough, his nickname was Butch. And I said to him, Butch, wolves aren't going to bother us. And he said, "You don't know that." I said, "Yeah, I pretty much do know that. And another thing, they're not going to cross water to do it."
I'm
But
not going to
he
swim
kept,
over here to do it.
yeah, he kept insisting that we all get into the tent. And he took all of the wood that we had gathered for the breakfast fire and threw it on the fire, which happened to be under a Norway pine.
Oh,
So we had to
no.
stay out there and make sure we didn't burn the island down. And that night, I told his story at breakfast, actually. So, guys, I had this weird dream last night that something big was rummaging around in the back of the tent in the middle of the night. And it woke me up. And whatever it was came out with this hatchet and crawled over to the door and had the hatchet up and was looking around outside the door of the tent and crept outside and stood 1 foot from the tent and urinated and then dove back in. And Butch said, "Shut up." I said, "No, Butch, this is just a weird dream." He said, "No, shut up." I said, "All right." But of course, it was, so this is kind of vicariously
Sure.
experiencing his fear, but that's going to be the one that does it.
Right. Right. Sure. Sure. No, I can see that completely. There's the things you say and sometimes the things you do are not always in line, right? And then
Right.
sometimes there's just that like, hey, everyone get inside. We're yeah. But so I have to ask though, because I know they've reintroduced wolves now the last 5, maybe 10 years now. Was there so I didn't realize there were still wolves at this time. Like when I don't know like what the
This was
chronology
the
is.
summer
Like
of 1959.
okay, so there's still wolves around at the time.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Is there wolves now? Do they? I know. I
Yeah.
know Michigan. They reintroduced them, but
Yeah. There are a lot of them, as a matter of fact, in
well,
northern
oh,
Minnesota
okay.
in particular. I had an opportunity one time to talk to Jim Brandenburg, the guy who's done all the wolf photography. And he told me that the most difficult thing about photographing wolves is getting close enough to them to get a picture. They want
Uh-huh.
nothing to do with people. And if
Sure.
they know you're around, they leave.
Right.
What a
Right.
lot of
Well, they're
people don't
smart. Yeah.
realize, and movies, of course, make a big deal out of it, but there's never been a documented account of a healthy wolf attacking a human being in North America. Not one.
Oh wow.
And I knew
Interesting.
this at the time, but
Uh-huh.
Butch obviously didn't.
But Butch did not.
He wasn't buying it.
Right. Butch thought it was the Beast of Bray Road, right? There's the Dog Man
Yeah.
in Michigan, or the werewolves that they call Dog Man now. But
Yeah.
yeah, very funny. What about you, Gaby? I know I thought about Jim, but what about you when you're writing and you want to get into a character, just characters, motivations, fear generally? How do you go about accomplishing that?
So, one of the tips I would give to anybody who's a writer would be to check out the Emotion Thesaurus. It's a book that talks about the physiological responses to different emotions and the different tells, like things you might do, fidget or pull on your clothes, or any gesture that a person might do, what it would translate to psychologically, so that you can help paint a picture of how the character is feeling. um, I find that that's really helpful kind of at the end of the process, when you've already gotten your notes down, kind of like Jessica said, and you've already got an idea of what you want to impart to the reader. And now you just have to find a way to make them see what you're already seeing. And so that kind of gives you some tells about what they would feel like inside their interiority of the character, as well as what they would do, maybe with their hands, or, fidget with a watch or something.
Sure, sure. How do you get in the headspace? Is it more clinical as in the here, and it's fine. I'm not judging one way or the other. Just, do you try to get yourself into the headspace of that character in fear? Do you look at them more clinically as a character and then think of, okay, here are the things, like that, thesaurus, right? Like, here are the things they would be experiencing and things, and go from there. Maybe there's
Mhm.
some middle place there, as well, I would imagine. But how do you handle it?
I think when you're getting the story down, you're feeling it more. Like, for example, somebody is trying to evade a rape or an attack, or, escape from a terrible date, or whatever the situation is. Um, at first, as you're writing these things down, you're going to have emotions that you can't really say, she said this angrily, like you're going to edit that out in future
Right.
drafts, but you kind of have to just get it down so that how is
Hmm.
she how is she feeling, and what does she sound like at this point. And then I think once you have the bones of what you're writing, then you can kind of decide what belongs where, as far as the different tells and the different gestures, and perhaps some explanation of inner thoughts, or how the body feels.
Hmm. Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Visceral
Thank
is a
you.
word I like to use a lot.
Mhm. Yeah.
You've got to be visceral.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, thanks for that. So, if you're watching Writers Drinking Whiskey, you are taking part in the meaning economy. And I mean that sincerely, even if my voice kind of has an ironic tone. This show is all about uninhibited, authentic conversations. And the quest we are on together is finding the authors and the works that are going to add meaning to the world and stand the test of time. And to that end, I will be releasing my most ambitious novel yet, Pirates of Appalachia, as a weekly serial on Substack. Pirates has everything you're looking for in a novel. It has adventure, it has pirates, it has hostile corporate takeovers, prophecy, love, longing for belonging, heroes, villains, psychedelic shenanigans of the highest order. Think 1984 with the Funny Bone. Kurt Vonnegut, if you found him drooling in an alley after a 3-night bender. Twain, if you replace that badass mustache with an eye patch and negligee. And rest assured, no sensitivity readers were injured in the making of Pirates of Appalachia. So please check out Substack. It's meeting the market needs by connecting readers directly with today's very best storytellers. We're just skipping the corporate kind of media apparatus and the endless scrolls on Amazon or Instagram or whatever else. You can get directly to creators on there, get a taste for their work, and then follow along the people that you love. And now let's get back to your regularly scheduled programming. Let's get back to it. So I wanted to transition the conversation over to instilling fear in the reader, right? Like there's the character expressing a character's fear, which is important. But most importantly, right, is what the reader's feeling, right? What are you conveying to? I always like to call it alchemy, right? Like you're mixing some ingredients here, right? You have lead, and you need to turn that to gold for the reader down the line. How do you go about instilling that fear, so that the reader feels it, right? Or the reader feels something on the edge, on the other edge of that page. Anyone that wants to jump in, kind of, you know, feel free, jump in, and we'll take it from there.
So
Yeah, good, all right.
my favorite character in Black Easter, which is my ritual black magic horror. It's very old school ritual black magic. They don't do that anymore. My favorite character is a very old priest in it, who's the only one who knows what they're really up against, my group of protagonists. And he is he's facing essentially, all the demons of hell. And my demonology in that is different. I spent a lot of time working it out. It's It's not off the shelf demonology. But he has a real crisis of faith at one point because he realizes that he's old and he just loses faith in himself. He just doesn't believe that he can stand up to what is challenging him. And I think because he's a sympathetic character, he spoke to me. I think he's pretty real. I found that a really powerful scene. He ends up on his knees, just terrified at one point, but he goes on anyway. Eventually, he finds his courage again and goes on because there's no one else to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it got pretty visceral. There's some long passages of interiority in that where we get, I think I really stuffed the reader into his head. I was in his head. And that worked, and a lot of people have told me that was a powerful scene. So, everything I said earlier, I think I answered your question prematurely about aligning the reader with your protagonist and making it real,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
and having stakes and having a protagonist who has to rise to the challenge no matter what the cost.
Right. Well, I think that's an interesting place to take it too, is like, what are the stakes? Right. Like I find, I know some of my work people say is literary fiction, which um fine. I'm not very label, specific, but what drives me crazy sometimes about literary fiction is it can be, just like vaguely unhappy people wandering the suburbs, vaguely witnessing epiphany, right? I mean, like you just kind of like just not you don't know what the stakes are for anyone, and I think a lot of people that are early on writing that kind of stuff, the people that are very good literary writers can do that story, but they actually make you know what the stakes are, like what the people are feel like. The stakes can be very personal, right? They can be
Exactly.
and I think the best stakes actually are very personal. Um, even if it's world ending, you need to have a person to relate that to for me to relate to the story. But I think kind of how do you relate those stakes? Like what are the goalpost here? Like in for Black Easter, right? It kind of was like world changing, right? And there's a soul, their soul was at stake. Sutherland's rules, it's not, world ending or their souls at stake. It's going to prison or, or whatever else might happen. So, um, it, I'm sorry, were you going to say
It's
something there?
personal and it's personal and subjective. You use the word personal. It doesn't have to be objectively world shaking or big. It can be as much as being, a teen being humiliated in front of the girl he's in love with.
Sure.
True. Yeah. I think there's something to be said when uh, you actually have a character, like you said, that people care about, but not just care about, but you're giving the reader a false sense of security that, like, this character has it down packed. They're going to get through this. Everything's going to be fine. Like, they've just been brave throughout this whole point. And then where, like, they just have that breaking point, like any other human being would have. And it's just like, oh, wait a minute. Like you set me up. I was really
Right.
believing that things were going to be fine. And then it's just this person is about to have either like a nervous breakdown or they're just going to give up. Uh, so yeah, like when it comes to the stakes, but like you said before, and I'm just kind of like repeating the same thing, but saying it differently, it's just, I always love that when you have this like really brave character and you feel like, oh, everything is gonna be fine, it's gonna be great. See, I personally, sometimes I do like horror movies ending on a happy ending. And sometimes I really enjoy the ones that don't end on a happy ending because it leaves me creeped out.
Sure.
Um, so, there's the stakes are there and whether they're going to win or lose, I think it's like really important to, it'll snatch the reader in. With me personally, I always use setting to really bring the fear into the reader. Um, I don't go into pages and pages describing something. I'm not that old school gothic. I'm not, but I use
Right.
setting and sound to really emphasize the fear. I really loved what they used in this, of course, like harkening back to the movie. I don't know if anyone's seen Paranormal Activity, the first one. We watched it at the movie theater, and just before the demon or the spirit was going to do something, you could feel it. They were so smart about upping the bass, and it was just a simple. It wasn't like even like a loud note of no kind. It was just a very deep, low, rocking bass that you could just feel. And I always try to, it's hard to do that, particularly in writing, but that is what I try to emulate, right? Like,
Sure.
how am I going to make you feel that like something is about to occur, something is about to happen? And really, everyone has very different structures of doing that. Um, Again, personally, with me, I use setting, I use sound. Um, Prose. If anyone's looking to get into writing any like tense horror or like any intense thrillers, read some poetry. It helps out a lot. Even alliteration itself, like if you do it, in a certain type of right way, it can help out to hone in, just the ambiance of
Sure.
the story itself.
Right. Well, I think those poetry not even terms, just techniques like
Mhm.
rhyme schemes and things that actually, if you do those, the reader doesn't. There's Adam Vines was on. He's the poetry editor for the Birmingham Review, if I remember that correctly. Um, and he was talking about like what he sees with a lot of new poets is they put in some scaffolding, and the expert poets take that scaffolding away and they leave the building, right?
Mhm.
And so then it's like, oh, if it was even rhyme schemes, right? You can go A B, right? Whatever. But you can have an idea scheme, right? And so sometimes
Mhm.
when I think about a chapter, if I'm trying to really figure it out, I'm like, what's kind of the idea scheme of this? Like, what's kind of happening here? Is it an A B? Is it a ABCBA kind of, like chiasmus, to use the proper term with it. But how do you go about doing that? And I think sometimes that can be really powerful actually because people pick up on patterns. We had talked
Mhm.
about that earlier. I think Daria had mentioned it. You pick up on patterns. You don't always have to say it. You don't have to beat someone over the head for them to pick up a pattern. And I don't think you always have to think of it so consciously, but I think sometimes if you after the fact or if you're struggling, what I always think of this show because I hate like it's so funny. I'm completely miscast in like hosting this show for writers talking to writers, right? Like writing, the actual show I like to talk to everyone about everything else besides writing, and then I circle back around to it just because I feel ethically mandated to, um but I always think like if it's when you're struggling, thinking about those techniques is actually when it's worthwhile, right? Or when you're like editing something, like you had mentioned actually earlier, Jessica, where actually when it was like, oh no, I think about that when I'm editing. I think that's the perfect way to do it. Is like sometimes you come back to a scene, you may go, this isn't quite working. How do I get
Mhm.
it to work? And that's when I think having that toolkit, all those thoughts and go, okay, here's stuff I can throw against the wall. Here's stuff I can think about can be really helpful. So, um,
Yeah,
any
totally.
other?
Because sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just feel like a lot of people who have the want or the need to write and haven't tried it, they have this misconception that like just naturally everybody just like blurts out a book and one and done or whatever.
Right.
I wish. But because I've had people in my family ask me like, "Oh, I'm thinking about writing a book. Like, what should I do?" And I'm just like, just get it down on paper. Just write it out. Like, worry about. the scenes and how everything's going to line up later. Because trust me, you're going to be going through that over and over and over and over again. So it's yeah, editing and using like Gabby, right? As mentioned before, the emotional thesaurus. That's not cheating. It's not cheating. It's
For sure.
helping to hone in your skill and your craft because like we continuously do that ourselves. I'm constantly opening up like thesaurus.com and I'm just like, what's another word for this? Like it's that
Right.
comprehensive. It's
Hmm.
just like it's clearly like the process, my process that I do, even when if anyone's like, writing a historical fiction or whatever have you, or what do you need to do research on? The research can end up happening as like you're drafting, you're going in and going through the rabbit hole of researching. Like we all
Right.
do it. We all do it. Like we all have this need and this want to write. And some of us, we're lucky enough to have like people who, support us and through it and kind of like push through or the little voice in our head that's telling us it's kind of just silly for us to do it. And then at the same time, we're editing and editing and editing and editing. Um, that's not to deter anybody from like writing, but it's just, again, using all these little tidbits and skills. It's not cheating. It's just the
Hmm.
way writing goes.
For
I
sure.
think editing is exactly where you reinforce all that stuff and you detail everything and you bring out what's already there. But while we're in the weeds, something you were saying made me think of this. We need to think about suspense when we talk about creating fear in the reader as well.
Hmm.
And I've more than once had to tell writers who feel they have to hold back stuff from the reader that suspense is created by the reader knowing what the consequences of things going wrong for the protagonist are. They're not created by mystery. So I think that's really important. If you want your reader to fear, they have to be informed. They have to know what the worst that can happen is, or at least have a pretty good idea. And then maybe it's worse, even worse than they thought it could be. But you don't do it by being mysterious. And a lot of newer writers get those things confused and think that creating mystery and keeping the reader in the dark is going to make things more suspenseful. It's the opposite. We all know that.
Right. Sure. So Dan, actually, thanks so much for that, Daria. The interesting place to kind of take it is that I remember when you did the reading for I forget which book it was, but it was Lexi, and it might have been the one you mentioned earlier, where she kind of momentarily, it seems like I think it's the prologue where she kind of momentarily escapes,
Hmm.
and she's trying to get away, and then it comes to the conclusion of the scene. But how do you handle that, the building of suspense, for that, and then that leading into fear, like Dario was just saying, it's easy to have. I don't know that it's like, I think you almost have to have suspense to have some kind of fear, but that might be a little too simple stated. But how did you go about that? Like, in that scene in particular, but more generally throughout the series.
Well, and I think in that scene, I think everybody at one point in their time, whether you were a child or an adult or whatever, have been chased. And you're running for your life, you're scared, you're trying to get away from something.
Right.
And I think, fear is universal. Everybody at some point in their life has felt fear. Maybe not to the level that your characters are feeling it, but I think everybody can draw. And I teach a seminar sometimes about writing fight scenes. And people
Uh-huh.
are like, well, I've never been hit. I've never been in a fight. I don't know how to write a fight scene. I'm like, have you ever stomped your toe to the point that you just couldn't stand it? I mean, you couldn't breathe. You just
Sure.
sat down,
Right.
you just cried. I said, you've known
Yeah.
pain. Whether you've been in a
Uh-huh.
fight or not, you've known pain. And with me, especially writing the prologue, the scene where she's being chased through the woods, and part of that I use the environment, the setting, the South Carolina, the humidity, the swamp, the Spanish moss, which is creepy in and of itself. So you're running through, she's trying to escape. But I think drawing just on the fact that kind of fear is universal, I think everybody can put themselves into that. Oh my God, if she doesn't make it, she's going to die. I mean, that's just that the ultimate issue
Right.
is she doesn't make it,
Right.
she's going to die. She's not walking out of there alive. And I
Hmm.
think people can kind of put themselves, at least I hope they could, into her shoes.
Right.
So that's kind of how I went about writing the prologue. Uh,
Uh-huh. Sure. Sure. I get that completely. What it was funny is as you said it, it reminded me of even like lesser stakes, right? Like the suspense of it is that even if it's someone that's just going to be embarrassed, right? So it's like, oh, hey, I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna have to, I don't know, I had a one night stand, and now I need to walk out of that room, right? If I
right.
walk out of the room and no one's there, there's no, I don't have a fear of being humiliated or embarrassed with that, right? But if I have to walk out of that room and my mom's there and she sees me walking out, there's like a sense. So if the reader knows that aspect, whatever that aspect might be, is that the dramatic irony of it is that the reader knows something maybe the character doesn't, or the character picks up on it a little, just a tad later, to where now they go, oh, no, their mom. Oh, now they have to walk out of there, and their mom's sitting there staring at them, knowing that they just did something that they wouldn't approve of, whatever it might be, right? Just going through that, having that foreknowledge, I think, can play a big part, even beyond because there's yeah, someone trying to assault you or trying to kill you, right? Like we get to the fear of it right away, but um, so Jem, actually, let me ask you. So when we talked a bit about the never failing vice of fools, and if you want to set it up a little, just so people kind of understand what we're talking about, but it's I'll set it up just a tad so I can ask the question and add whatever context you would like. But it's a high school kid that is a high school boy, and he has a crush on a girl, and he's kind of like afraid of being made a fool of, like as he goes through, and that becomes kind of his vice as he goes through, not realizing that he's ends up making a fool of himself. But how did you go about layering the suspense of that? Because there is actual real suspense in that story, like as the dramatic monologue goes through and stuff. How did you layer the suspense in and set up for the reader that what the character was fearing?
That is almost entirely autobiographical.
I didn't know that until this moment. That's hilarious that I'm asking the question. Yeah.
I wrote that I'd, it was an assignment in college. I was in a
Uh-huh.
creative writing class and I'd written something else and it wasn't any good at all. And so this breakup had been on my mind for a couple of years. Well, actually, a year or so. And I just decided to write about it. And instead of taking it, putting the blame on her, which the protagonist does, I wanted it to come back on him.
Uh-huh.
And so most of what the story talks about actually did happen, except that he is a bit more insecure, a bit more evil, maybe, than he actually was. So I had to fabricate a little bit on that. But interestingly enough, it was very cathartic because the relationship had been bothering me for quite some time, and that story kind of was the anodyne.
Uh-huh. Sure.
Lovely.
Yeah. I get it
He doesn't.
completely.
Yeah, he doesn't realize, of course, that he's coming off as an absolute jerk, but that's what he was.
Right, right. It's so funny. My first novel, after horrible publication history now, but the ripping apart is the title. But character Jack was started off as it starts off with an event that was a real thing that happened with me and my now wife, Claire, the lovely Claire, as I like to say on the show, because I think it mildly annoys her, and she also mildly maybe appreciates it. Um, but the lovely Claire and I went and visited a teacher of hers that was a hoarder. Um, and it kind of made me think like she was alcoholic and a hoarder, and you can read the book if people are interested, but the character of Jack then is forced to confront his demons, from seeing her, this lady, Miss Lyons, in the novel, that's been overwhelmed by her demons, her personal demons. Um, and so he has to deal with that. And the way I did that was he had started off, this was a real encounter. So he starts off as a fox, kind of a faux me, and then I took everything, all of my worst inclinations, and ran with them, to where at the end I don't feel like now I don't feel like it's auto fiction. I don't feel like me and Jack are the same person at all. But it started from that real place. So I can see your point was that started from a real place of me going, oh, what demons am I not dealing with? What problems am I not dealing with? And that allowed me to get in artistically to what his fears are, whether the things he's dealing with his motivations and such. So, and it was kind of cathartic in its way too. That it let me kind of step away and go, okay, you know what, I'm not. I haven't fallen apart as much as he has. I've certainly failed. I've certainly fallen apart. Um, Jesus maybe in certain ways fell apart worse than he did at different times, but in the course of that, it wasn't. I didn't let people down that badly, so I can see that completely. So, um, Gaby, what about you when you want to take it when you're trying to hit the heartstrings of the reader, as I like to say, the heartstrings, when you want to kind of hit those, what are the what's the tune you play when you're hitting the reader's heartstrings?
So much easier to just play a tune.
On the ukulele. Can you
On
just
the
bring the ukulele
ukulele.
down and play us a tune now?
I should. I should. I wonder if Frida Kahlo was a musician as well. Um,
Maybe.
but what I thought about today as I was thinking about our conversation that we were going to have was, is anybody familiar with the Rumsfeld matrix of the knowns and the unknowns?
Mm-mm.
So it's picture this, and I'll give you a graphic that you can put up when this goes up. But there's four things: the known unknowns, which are the things that we are aware of and we do not understand. The known knowns, which are the things that we are aware of and we do understand. The unknown knowns, which are the things we aren't aware of for the situation that we're dealing with, but we do understand. And then finally, we have the unknown unknowns, which are the unforeseen things, the things we're not aware of, and we don't understand them. And so I was thinking about those four ways of looking at a situation and thinking about what would really throw a wrench into this situation. What could go wrong? What would be an entertaining thing to go wrong since you're writing a story? Or what is
Hmm.
the thing that would disrupt the natural expectations of a reader and maybe scare them or maybe make them feel happy or whatever the case may be. So I was thinking about that, and I think that was from Donald Rumsfeld, if you guys remember him,
Sure.
government figure from the Bush era.
Yeah.
And what was the question? Because that was what I was thinking, and I hope it makes sense,
Hmm.
but I don't know about other ways to pull on heartstrings. I think, getting into the character and having the reader want be rooting for them is most of that. And then presenting them with challenges is another aspect of it. And one of my favorite stories I've written was about a stalker, and it was just the feedback I got from critiques was just so entertaining. Like, oh my God, I'm so afraid, and I'm like, I did my job. Like you have to think about like where are my risks? Where
Hmm.
I live. He has the key to my apartment. He, knows where I'm going with my friends, and maybe he'll show up and you know he'll he'll do this thing that makes it hard for me to say no even though I don't want to deal with him or
Sure.
no.
Oh, I remember that. That was very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, I remember that.
Very good. Yeah, no, thank you for that. Yeah, and I think the grid you referenced is a good tool to kind of think about it, right? And how to think about through a scene. So,
Mhm.
thanks for that. And so, before we hit our toast of the night, last question here, just relating to fear. So, is there's especially if you're writing a novel, maybe short story, not so much. Maybe in a short story, but maybe not so much. Um, there's also like you need to, if you need to write a 300-page thriller, it would, ideally, yes, you would just grow, I guess, and you would hit at page 275, the ultimate fear, and then you have a little denouement, and you would go from there. But usually, what ends up happening is more like this, right? You have a little bit of ups and downs, right? So you have some pressure release valves as the novel goes on. Um, how do you detect when you might need when you might need to kind of release the pressure,
Mm.
and then how do you do it, right, without undermining, the action, right? Like I think with a lot of films now, like my son, my William the Eighth, so William Wallace, um, he was really into Spider-Man. And so we never watched any Marvel movies. The lovely Claire and I aren't really that big of moviegoers generally. But he got so into it. When he was a kid, he only wore Spider-Man costumes. And so actually Claire would like strip him out of it when he was sleeping, put him in a new one, and then go wash it so that she could like, wash his clothes. And he loved it. And he would, even from a young age, we could take him to the movies. He would sit and he would watch the movie. He would talk to you about it after. He was good. So we ended up watching all of the Marvel. And early on, it was very fun. It was a good time. He enjoyed it. He doesn't now. He's 14. He has no interest anymore. But it wasn't just that he aged out. It was also that the it started to get so, amongst probably many things. One of the things that me and him have talked about is that nothing felt serious anymore because every single time there was a serious moment, they would have to make a quip, or they had to make they were always releasing the pressure. They never let any pressure build up. Right. So you never actually cared about what happened to Spider-Man 8 movies in, because at that point he's going to make a joke of it. The world's about to end and I'm going to make a quip. Where at certain points that can be funny. At other points, it's just you just undermined all of your dramatic tension. So, how do you go about that aspect? And I don't. It could be superheroes. It could be thrillers, horrors, just whatever. How do you go about that when you feel like maybe the pressure has hit a maximum and you need to release it a little, just to keep the story going, just to kind of manage, your reader as you go through.
I think we're talking about beats, and I've no idea because I'm totally a pantser. I know other people plot it out, and if you read, I won't use the expletives I want to, but if you read books like Save the Cat, they'll tell you that the beats have to happen on exactly this measure and this timing. I think if you've got a real story told by real living characters, the beats happen as part of the organic nature of the story. I'm a
Hmm.
true believer in the organic process of writing.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I it not purposely, but like Dario was saying, the organic life of the character, what did they do outside from being haunted by this thing that just like creeps up on them every now and again? Typical home stuff.
Sure.
She's either with her family or down at the beach or, getting to know some of the locals and learning about it's a different sort of pressure that's being put on her with regards to social injustices and such like that versus there's this thing that may or may not kill me, or I'm just imagining it, so I could just be going crazy type situation. But it just really all depends on the character, their backstory, um, essentially like what is their everyday thing. Because that in itself, even relieving the pressure and showing the natural nuances of the character as far as like they're just doing these regular things again, I'm a big fan about a false sense of security. So as a horror
Right.
writer, I just may F with you and just like throw something in there to just, you know, really just be like, oh, is I'm playing on your anxieties. I'm making you panic. Just like she has this like slight panic in the back of her head that any moment something could happen. But sometimes I just leave you alone. I let you enjoy the day and everything's fine, until it's
That's
not.
so terrifying as you say it. So, like,
Hmm.
Well,
I'm
things
just
things
worried about
things
this podcast generally.
Yeah,
that valve's going to automatically release at some point.
yeah,
I mean, otherwise your whole book would be a climax, and you can't have that. And in real
right.
life, people reach a point where the situation is, just to take an example, so ridiculous they crack up and laugh at
Hmm.
themselves,
Sure.
or someone has to go to bed, or you've got to do some backstory or something. So I think, Dana, I'm really curious as to your opinion on this. I've not read any of your work yet, but I know what you write, and I've seen your interview, and I know the material you deal with. So how do you see this process?
Well, occasionally, I think humor is a good way to release the tension too. Um, Police in general are notorious for having a macabre sense of humor and, making fun of the dead body and things like that. And it
Hmm.
really happens. It happens in real life, and it's a coping mechanism a lot of times. I mean, they're not bad people. It's just their way of getting through a really bad situation.
Sure.
So I think sometimes I use humor or something just ridiculous happening. All of a sudden, it's like, okay, you just release that tension, but now you have another something to deal with. But yeah, I like to throw in a little comedy here and there.
Yeah.
I think my husband says that I think I'm a lot funnier than what I actually am, but
You and me both, and I get it.
yeah. So I don't know. I think I'm
I
funny.
think we're hilarious
I
for
think
what
we're
it's.
both really funny. Yes.
It's really funny that you say that because I also think so because I like to infuse humor in most of my works. Just short stories, maybe not always, but um, and in But the Ripping Apart, I was talking about the climax that Jack is a single dad, and he was reading his kids. This is a real book. Everybody poops. And it's like a book you read your kids when they're, actually my granddaughter does this now. Like she's potty trained, but whenever she needs to poop, she's like shuts all the doors. She doesn't want anyone around her. She like barricades herself to it. And otherwise she'll talk to you, she'll do whatever, like if she's just going to pee. But when it's that, she goes. And so in the novel, kind of the climax, as his interiority is going through, he thinks about that book, and then that's kind of a break, kind of the joke of it. And then, but the next beat, it goes, but not everyone sits in it, not everyone festers in it, and he's talking about the hoarding and the drama. So it's like you hit a beat and you get that pressure release, and then you come right back to it. It's like the
Right,
suction
right.
right back to it.
Mhm.
So I think kind of finding those moments where like you, even if you do it, if you kind of come back, I mean that's just a technique. I think you can do anything, right? And sometimes you just need the release, but depending on where you're at, it's like you can have a joke in the climax, but you still need to keep the seriousness in that moment. Or that could be a little earlier on, you're a little earlier and you're just going to release the pressure a little bit just to let the reader come back to the next chapter. And most people don't read a book in one day. Most you kind of come back to it, so you can give them those certain moments, those commercial breaks. Like this
Right.
TV would do, right? You
Good word.
give them a little bit of a commercial break, let them kind of come back to it. Give them a little moment to kind of feel good and go, okay, well, I can go to bed now.
I think as we progress as writers, so many things become reflex and intuitive,
Sure.
and you just do it. It's the way it writes itself.
Right. Sure. Awesome. So before we do our rapid fire questions, I like to do shots right at the end here. Then we'll do our toast. Any other final thoughts on fear, on Halloween fear? I should turn that thing for the viewing audience at some point. This TV does do this terrifying fear thing.
I love that TV. I've been looking at it.
Let's see if it works.
Is it still picking up the Twilight Zone?
It's gonna get terrifying in a minute if you guys can see it.
Oh, that's so cool. Is that like imprinting outward?
It is, yeah.
Oh, that's
It's
very cool.
the
Love
skull
it.
kind of comes out of the screen. But I'll probably cut that out for the poor viewing audience here, but maybe
Mhm.
not because I'm also a lazy editor. But any final thoughts, and we'll
I
do
have a
shots and do our
question
toast of the
I
night
have
and
a
we'll cut it
question
out.
for Dario.
Yeah.
Dario, did you put Dracula behind you for this by design?
This was a gift from a friend.
Ooh.
Oh, that
It's
is a
a
really cool copy. I like that.
it's a great it's a great edition. Yeah, it's a great edition. It's illustrated.
Oh, that's
Um,
awesome.
yeah,
I I I desperately want to do all of the Draculas, all of the public works, kind of Mark Twain, and do just gorgeous editions of them. I've seen people like do paintings on the pages because that one looked like the pages on the edges were kind of there. And just make them just works of art. I think that the way they're meant to be, I think that would be really cool.
That
I
It
would
would
I
be
never
have
be financially feasible, probably, but it would be really cool.
I have and I'm sorry, Jim. I didn't quite catch your question. Did I answer it? Were you just inquiring about it?
Well, I was asking if that was there by design because of
Oh,
the
oh,
theme
because of
tonight.
tonight? No,
Yes.
that's where it lives, and this is how I
Okay.
usually position my camera so you don't see the teddy bear sitting on the armchair. Um, but I've also got a lovely edition of all the Arthur Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes stories with the original illustrations from the Strand magazine, which I'm rather fond of.
nice.
Very
Got a
cool.
first edition Connecticut Yankee with all the illustrations in it. It's
Oh,
very nice. Very,
oh wow.
yeah.
I have a Dalian illustrated book of Don Quixote.
Wow.
Oh, very
Oh
Yeah.
cool.
wow.
A friend bought it for me. We went to like a vintage bookshop over in the I want to say Rehoboth somewhere, Bethany Beach. And I saw it, and he and his wife picked it up for me, and I was like, "Oh, love you guys so much."
Isn't that nice? Oh, that's
Yeah,
wonderful.
yeah, they're
As you should.
awesome.
Books are so important to me. I can't, I mean, I read a lot on Kindle these days, but I have to have books. I have to have physical books around, and I pick them up and I, reread passages, and I just
Mhm.
still love them.
Same.
Sure. Sure.
Never
Very sure.
die.
Every day, yeah, yeah. I love the physical books. I barely ever read Kindle. I know I'm probably just a person of my age, but um, I like the feeling of the book. You know, in fact, I'm building a Writers Drinking Whiskey library. So everyone that
Oh,
sends me one,
cool.
I have the signed ones. It's just I'm gonna have a big. I'm actually gonna put it up. Where's my hand? There it is. The kind of corner where my hand is right now. I'm gonna build a
Right.
bookshelf specifically for it, and it'll just be books from people from the show, all
Oh,
signed.
great.
And I'll build it through
Mm.
because it's more special every time I get them. I'm just like I'm super excited. I'm like, oh look, and whoever it happens to be, right? Like, oh, Dario, oh Sue, whoever you sent me a copy. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna keep this forever. Now that's never going to a tiny library. This is one I keep. So I'm like, I'm gonna keep these and enjoy it. So, um,
Sorry, just to add, I just noticed it in my background. Just to add to Jim, um, I don't know if you can all see it, probably only someone on a desktop, but I've got another horror book living where it normally lives over there, which is SS, and it's the
oh
history
yeah, I
of
see
the
it.
SS. So
Oh,
that's about as good a horror as you get.
yeah.
Sure, sure, for sure. Awesome. So let's do our shots. So just rapid fire questions. We can go through everyone here, just three of them here, and we'll do our toast of the night, and we'll call it a Halloween here as we were. So first question here: would you rather be a character in a Nightmare on Elm Street, so with Freddy Krueger movie, or in an H.P. Lovecraft story? So anyone? So actually, let's flip sides. Although it flipped on my screen here, let's flip sides here. Let's start with you, Jessica. Who would you rather be, Nightmare on Elm Street story or H.P. Lovecraft book?
Well, if I'm going to be a victim, I think I would rather have a swift death. So let's say Nightmare on Elm Street. If I'm just there as a witness, then definitely it's gonna have to be Lovecraft.
Uh-huh. Sure. I mean, you could be a character one way or the other. You could be the one that
Yeah,
perhaps lives. So it's
yeah.
all
Well, if
fine.
that's the case, definitely Lovecraft.
Very good. Thank you for that. Gaby, what about you?
I think I would also pick a Lovecraft story just because it would be a little bit more nuanced than a horror movie.
Mm-hmm. Sure, sure. Amen. Jim?
I would do the same. In fact, you brought up Spider-Man. When that was resurrected in the graphic novel, a guy named James Tynan did it. He put me in as a character. He's a
Did
former, yeah, he was a former student of mine.
Oh, great.
And I became Dr. Carney, the nuclear physicist. He killed me off in a page and a half. Mr. Freeze got to me.
he? Okay, you have to, after this, send me the details on that. I'll put them on the screen for people that watch on the YouTube version, but and I'll
Okay.
put a note for the podcast folks. But I need a copy myself, so that's amazing. Thank you for
Yeah, it
that.
was it was the first of the brand new Spider-Man graphic novels.
Uh-huh. Very cool.
Wow.
Very cool. That's really funny. Dana, what about you?
Well, I was hoping for like a hot vampire, but if I can't have a hot vampire, I think I'd take Freddy Krueger because I think I could outrun him. I think I could. I think I could be the one to get away.
Uh-huh. Sure, sure. You just have to wake up. Awesome. Thanks for that. Dario, what about you?
I think you have more of a chance against Freddy Krueger. Without a doubt, Lovecraft. I love the mythos. I think it's about as good a metaphor for reality as we have, an uncaring universe where elder gods are thinking of eating us all. Yeah, Lovecraft, hands down. It would be so much fun to watch them do their thing.
Uh-huh. Oh, sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah, if you're just gonna be a witness of it, you might as well choose. I actually my earlier I used to love horror movies, and I had little supervision, little to none supervision, and so it was actually the original Nightmare on Elm Street that was the first thing that gave me nightmares. So we watched it, and there's a scene where the girl's dreaming and she's beneath her sheet and they show her dreaming and Freddy like killing her, and then they show her in the sheet, and there's no one there, but she's being like cut up, you know. And that terrified me so much. That
Ah,
terrified, a 10-year-old William Montmorency so much that I used to fold my blanket so Freddie couldn't fit in. You know? So like the bend it up, I would do it. I look across the street, like where my bed was. You look out the window and look across the street, and I would always like think I was seeing things there, but I'm like, well, as long as this is tucked in, Freddie can't fit in to do what he was doing. So um, I see that completely. So favorite Halloween tradition. So actually, I know Dario, you didn't have much of one growing up, but maybe we start with you. We'll circle back around.
I like the little kids, you know, come the 5-year-olds and 4-year-olds who come as witches and things. They're awfully cute. I like to stand at the door and compliment them on their costumes and give them candy. But I wasn't brought up with Halloween. It's not a thing for me.
Uh-huh, sure. Very good.
Except I will say, I think the Mexican idea of the Day of the Dead, and we have it in Italy as well, is a really solid tradition.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, I actually like to do the Day of the Dead. They do one up. Actually, we did it
Oh, the
together, Dario.
downtown
We did
LA
the
one.
train.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, we did.
we went to Olivero Street and did it. That's always a really I'm just gonna say cool because I'm a man of my time, but that doesn't completely solve it. But yeah, it's really cool to go see it and get to see the traditions and the honoring of the dead, and the
Exactly.
continuation of life and things. So that's really beautiful. So thanks for that, Dana. You want to take us from there?
Well, growing up, my mother had this tradition that I didn't care for because my sister is younger than me and she's very lazy. And we would go out trick-or-treating, and then mom would put all of the candy on the table and we'd split it evenly. Even though I
Oh,
had like four times, I had done four times the work. My lazy sister quits, but she gets half the candy. And my sister,
Uh,
to this day, still thinks that's so funny that she took half my candy. So. And I love Halloween. I'm actually flying back to Kentucky to be with my sister and niece. That's 8, and I'm taking her trick-or-treating. I took her last year trick-or-treating, so I'm taking her
very
this year.
cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I dress up and I go trick-or-treating with her, and then my dad cooks. So when we come back, we have fun just eating snack type foods. It's a lot of
Right.
fun.
Yeah, yeah, very cool. Are you gonna wear the skeleton costume as
You
you
know,
do it?
I wore the skeleton last year, so I'm going to do Harry Potter stuff this year. My niece is 8
Oh,
and she's
okay.
really into Harry Potter, super, super into Harry
Oh,
Potter. She doesn't even
Uh-huh.
know that I have a Harry Potter outfit, so I'm going to surprise her. I've got the wand and
Oh,
everything.
very cool. Very cool. You'll have to
Yeah,
bring her out this way because Universal Studios in Florida does too, I hear. But they have the Harry Potter land, which is really fun.
yeah.
When our kids were into it, we get to go. They get to go pick their wand and whatnot. So
Oh, she would
those are
love
always
that.
fun.
It's really awesome.
Yeah, yeah, very cool. Thanks for that. Jim, what about you?
I would have to go with the trick or treat.
Yeah, yeah.
Just the kids, doing their best, putting on the show and enjoying themselves.
Uh-huh.
The American traditions began in Ireland, called Samhain,
Hmm.
Uh-huh.
mhm.
and here we are.
Yeah.
But that would be my pick. Was I just enjoy having the kids show up, and I answer the door. I don't put something out in front. I always answer the door and hand it out personally.
Right, sure, sure. Yeah, I was like our little neighborhood's a little cul-de-sac, and we have a freeway next to us, and we're just where we are. We don't get much. We, it it's grown a little. We have more families now, so now maybe we get 3 people a year. But there's times where literally no one came, so we would just, in case someone
Yeah,
came, we would leave it out. But it was never anything. But I love the people coming to the door, and the trick or treating and seeing the costumes. All of that is it's fun. Seeing the, and then if you're in a space and the people are growing up, you actually see the kids grow up. And
yeah.
that's a neat little experience in
Mm.
itself. So,
Yeah.
JB, you want to take us from there?
Sure. One of the things that I started doing when I moved to Los Angeles was I set up a friend up for the first time. And it was because I was starting to lose people, older relatives and sometimes peers due to illnesses or things like that. And I wanted to have a way of just kind of looking at them and remembering them for, a few weeks out of the year. So I set one up probably at the start of October and and just enjoy remembering them and having my memories of them. And every November 1st, I put it away, and unfortunately, sometimes I have to add a photograph
Hmm.
the ensuing time before the next October season. But I used to think, well, I don't want to be appropriating another culture, but it's a very personal thing. And
Hmm.
and so it's a very nice way to remember people that I love.
Hmm. Sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And Jessica, you want to take us home on this question?
Sure. Halloween in this house is all day, every day. Um, no, we were so I come from like a big family back home in Jersey, where I'm originally from. And one of the Halloween traditions for us back then was as kids, you get, mind you, my mom has nine or had nine siblings, and they all had like 3 to 4 kids of their own. So we will all gather at our grandmother's house. And from there, we will all go trick or treating to like the best neighborhoods and the best houses, get the best candy, and then come back for like snacks. So that's growing up. But now, a wonderful Halloween tradition is that my husband and I love to spend our wedding anniversary scaring the crap out of the kids in the neighborhood and giving them candy. Yeah, like I mean, he loves it especially. He loves scaring the crap out of them. But we'll have family and friends over. We'll throw on horror movies in the background. My parents will be hanging out in there while we're outside braving the cold and scaring the kids and passing out candy and just having food. And it's just a really nice time. Sometimes I'll make a apple cider and stuff like that. So yeah, it's good times.
Very cool. Thank you. Thank you for that. And thanks so much everyone for tuning in. So I and joining here. So I like to end it with our toast of the night. So anyone, toast, you want family, friends, other writers, whatever it might be, if you want to raise our glass and give a toast, we can go from there. So maybe Dario, we start with you and we'll go through the line. Any toast of the night.
I want to toast the most important people in our lives who are all the partners and wives and husbands and friends and significant others that a writer has who support you and believe with you and put up with your staring at walls all day and acting scenes out and thinking you're very funny as we mentioned. And I know that without my wife's support I couldn't do it, could never have done it. So
Amen. Linda is a saint.
mhm.
So cheers. Awesome. Thanks for that. Dario, Dana, you want to take us from there?
Well, I'd like to, on that same note, toast my writing family at the Pat Conroy Literary Center. I volunteer at the Pat Conroy Literary Center, and we have a wonderful bunch of writers, and everybody is so supportive of one another. And you can pick up the phone at any given day, any given time, and somebody's going to answer you or be there for you. And we become all very close, and it's not just writing. We've had people lose spouses. We've had people, go through deaths of family members, deaths of parents and stuff. And the Pat Conroy Literary Center, my friends there have always come through. And it's just, it's an amazing group of people. I definitely would not be the writer I am without them, that's for sure. So I'd like to
Yeah.
give a toast to them.
Amen. Mazel tov.
Oh,
Thank you so much for that, Dana. Jem, you want to take us from there?
Well, I would like to toast all my friends. They have done so much to make me who I am, to make me feel good about my life. And I'm always open to making new ones. And I wouldn't be anywhere without those people, without all those people.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I
Amen.
include in that writers that I've read that I don't know, but I know through their writing. The latest one is a guy named Niall Wilson, Irish writer, wrote a book called This Is Hanging Fire on the Name. Anyway, it's a very good novel.
That's okay. I can put it up on the screen here when for folks on the YouTube box. But what was the writer's name again?
Niall, Niall
Uh-huh.
Wilson.
Wilson. Okay. Okay. Very good. Awesome. Well, thanks for that. So
This is happiness. This is happiness is the title.
this is
Mm.
happiness. Awesome.
Yes.
Cheers to you,
Very clever.
and cheers to happiness. Um, awesome. Thanks so much for that. Jem and Gaby, you want to take us?
Sure. I will say kind of an offshoot of friends is those wonderful critique buddies weigh in on your work and tell you what they think and use their best strengths to make your work better and are willing to listen to you and take your advice and also just those chats with writers where I call it the writer's sanity check-in. Like once in a while, I'll send a friend a appointment for a writer's sanity check-in. And
Uh-huh.
and that means that we don't have to talk about writing, but we can just talk about all the things that are in our lives at that moment that are affecting how productive or not that we are at our writing.
Uh-huh. Sure. Very good. So
Cheers.
Oh,
cheers to them. And last but surely not least, Jessica, what's your toast of the night?
I would actually like to toast to all of my great nieces and great nephews and to my little niece who's starting school again. Know that it's some hard times and going to school in itself is difficult because of what you're dealing with the environment of other kids, but do it, learn well. Best of all, learn yourself well and just keep going. Skull.
Oh,
Oh,
skull. There you go. Awesome. And thanks so much, everyone, for coming on. I always appreciate everyone coming on and dealing with me continuously is you don't have to, but we do. So thanks so much for joining in, and happy Halloween to anyone listening or watching. Enjoy the holiday and cheers.